So Kevin Holland is not looking good after his podcast that he did with Rampage Jackson. The MMA community, for the most part, from what I'm seeing, maybe I'm wrong, has turned against him. A lot of people that were fans, even content creators like the MMA Guru, just like last night, have all turned against him a little bit and, kind of called him out for being a bit weird on the podcast. In the podcast, he threatened, he didn't threaten outright to shoot Rampage Jackson, but he certainly implied it through a variety of different ways of saying it. It was really, really uncomfortable. I felt threatened watching it, partly. You know what I mean? I was a bit like, this is really uncomfortable to watch at some points, that I actually had to turn it off myself. But the key talking points of it was a 70-45. We don't really have guns over here in the UK. They're illegal. And if you have them, naughty boy or girl, or they, or them, whatever. But you can't really get your hands on them over here, so I don't know anything about guns, you know what I'm trying to say? And look at me, lads. Could I even hold one? I'm not sure. Maybe a Nerf gun, but, certainly not a real one. He's talking about gun types and stuff like that, basically implying but not saying outright, you should come to Texas. We can have a shootout. I don't know what he's trying to say. It was really, really weird. And even if he wasn't trying to say that, it came across like he was. And it was super fucking uncomfortable to watch. I've got to say, really, really uncomfortable to watch at several points. But what I like about this podcast episode is I think it showed Rampage Jackson. This guy is a guy that used to break down doors in The Ultimate Fighter. We've all seen it. When he was in his younger days, he probably would have ripped Kevin Hollands' head off for talking to him like that and telling him to shut the fuck up and stuff like that. But I think it shows, and actually, it's a good example to people to keep you cool, especially when you're in a professional setting, and not really lose your head. Because I feel like it would have been so easy for Rampage Jackson to lose his head there and kind of go at Kevin Holland, and Kevin Holland go at him, and it sort of escalate a little bit further. But I think he showed the composure and actually being a good role model to really take a step back and be like, look, what the fuck are you on about? When he called Kevin Holland out for his ego, inadvertently, Kevin Holland's ego came out more and he got more insecure about it and switched to a gun, talking about guns, because that's the only thing he sort of has over on, Rampage Jackson. He couldn't say to Rampage Jackson, oh, well, you were a shit champion, you're not champion level, you were a shit fighter, because Rampage was a proven better fighter than him. So he has to kind of find something else that Rampage Jackson isn't an expert on, or Rampage Jackson, can't critique, like talking about guns. So whether or not he was even trying to threaten Rampage or not, which I think he was, at the end of the day, I don't know how many of you lot have ever been threatened in life, or just threatened to any degree. That was very weird. It was very weird. And I seen a few comments on the video maybe trying to say that he wasn't trying to threaten him per se. But to me, the whole you should come to Texas was just so fucking cringe. You're a grown man. You know what I mean? What are you doing? Get a grip. You're a professional fighter. Show some composure, for God's sakes. You know what I mean? And the thing is as well, it would have been so easy for Rampage Jackson to lose his cool. And, he had valid reasons to do it. Even if he did lose his cool, people would probably back him for doing it. But I think it just shows that just because someone's being a dickhead to you and showing their ego, maybe a bit insecure that you called him out for having an ego for talking in fights, which is something we all know that he does. I'm not the first one to say this. I'm not going to be the last one. How many people do you know that you've played a PlayStation game with? Let's say you've had a sibling and they're just nowhere near as good as you. But then, each time you beat them, they sort of go laughing off they're getting pissed off about it, but they're laughing it off I wasn't trying. I used to sometimes lose to my younger siblings at FIFA on the old Xbox games. And I would sometimes turn to them and say, and now I'm going to try. You know what I mean? This is little JMMA days, from the ages of 9 to 10. You know what I'm trying to say? I used to do stuff like that. Kevin Hollands sort of reminds me of that when he's saying, I don't want to be UFC champion. I don't like the media obligations. I don't like this and this and that. And TJ Dillashaw jumped on the podcast later on and he was basically like, you're just not good enough to be champion. Now, I actually think Kevin Holland had a lot of ability, power, athleticism. Back then he was quite quick. And I think at some point, Kevin Holland did stop caring, or at least told himself so many times that it doesn't matter to him, that he actually started to believe it. But I do think deep down in Kevin Holland, like when Rampage called him out for having an ego when he's talking in fights, I think that upset Kevin Holland, who doesn't care, as he says so much, just because, you know, there's a bit of truth in there. Like Teddy Atlas, famous boxing coach in the past, has talked about it too, that Kevin Holland talks in fights when he's losing, especially when he's losing, when he's on his back losing or something like that. Maybe to not feel bad, or maybe to not feel like he's giving up, or to amp himself up a little bit, or to maybe take sting off the fact that he's losing, where, well, if I tried a little bit harder, you know, I would have won. You know, if I did this, if I weren't talking so much, I would have won. And I definitely think that is a true theory. If you look at his fights, you know, Thiago Santos, for example, or like, I don't know, who's another fight? He's done it so many times. Derek Brunson, I think he did it against him. There's been so many times where it looks like Holland's breaking in there, so he sort of has this like mental cushion in his head that's sort of like, well, I don't care anyway. So it doesn't hurt him as much. But I actually think Kevin Holland's fought so many top-level fighters. Wonderboy gave him hard problems. Good wrestlers like Derek Brunson, you know, top-level fighters in general like Khamzat Chimaev. He's done well against some. He's lost badly to others. I think Kevin Holland is a guy that at some point in his career, and I said this in my UFC 311 reaction, gave up. At some point, I don't know what point that was, but he gave up trying to improve. I remember, I don't know if it was after the Brunson fight, but he went to go train at AKA with Team Habib. I don't know how long he did that for. Daniel Cormier, I think, invited him up from what I can remember. And, you know, his takedown defense and jiu-jitsu did improve from that. But aside from that, I don't think I've ever really seen Kevin Holland fight differently to what he usually does. 1-2s on the feet, decent boxing, decent knockout power, decent jiu-jitsu off his back, dangerous knockout power from his back, like Jacare Souza, probably one of his career best wins. You know, that was a good stoppage win for Kevin Holland. Like, he had some real momentum back in the day in the UFC. And I remember when he came in and he was shouting at Israel Adesanya, "Don't play with me, boy." You know, I don't know if you remember this. He was shouting at Israel Adesanya, "Don't play with me, boy." You know, I remember that stuff. And everyone was like, "Oh, Trailblaze, Trailblaze." His nickname, Trailblaze to the top. To the top. You don't care. You don't care and you don't want to be champion, but your nickname was Trailblaze to the top. To the top of what then? Poundland? What do you mean? Your nickname's Trailblaze to the top, which means you want to go to the top. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I've never understood why there's this... It's not ego. Every fighter has ego, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with having a bit of ego. But it's this sort of... I guess it's like frustrating to watch as a fan of his, to see him not try to tell himself that he doesn't care. When in my mind, sometimes it's like, I look at him, I don't know him personally, but I look at him and I look at his press conferences and I look at his fights and I think, you do care though. I can sort of see it in the guy's eyes. I don't know about you lot. I can sort of see it in his eyes and I think, you do care. You just act like you don't. And, you know, I don't know whether it's because I've been like that certain ways and stuff in my life, or whether some of you lot will relate to certain stuff. It's okay to be that way. But I actually think sometimes with Kevin Holland, there is a better fighter in Kevin Holland that if he was willing to accept the pain of losing, if he was willing to learn the lessons from losing, I actually think he could have gone a lot further. But people always talk about fighting being a mental game. And I wouldn't know, because look at me, guys. Look at me. I'm not one of the greatest fighters of all time. I'm not Rampage Jackson. I'm not whatever. But they always talk about the mental aspect of fighting. This is what separates the very, very best from the talented but couldn't quite make it. And I think that's where Kevin Holland will fall. And I think that's how his career is going to get looked upon when he retires. Thank you all very much for watching. I shall see you all soon. I'm going to be dropping my MMA conversation video tomorrow. I'm sorry I didn't upload it today. Just timings didn't quite work out. I thought I'd just upload a quick rant on Kevin Holland. Just think there's a better fighter there than Kevin Holland. Maybe even himself thinks there is. That's just my opinion as a fan of his. You know, this is isn't coming from a place of hate. But fair play to Rampage for keeping his composure. Regardless, thank you all very much for watching. Goodbye.